I've gotten some great questions already from this audience, and I think I want to start with one that combines an audience question with one of mine. And in responding to it, you should also feel free to kind of engage each other. So I think that there are some things around which there are consensus that we're talking about interconnected systems in terms of K-12, higher ed, teacher preparation, what happens in schools. There is a sense of urgency, a sense that the complexity of teaching has increased, a sense that the changes we need to move are systemic in nature. They're not piecemeal. We know that there is a strengthened role, or should be, for clinical training and experience. Residencies are one example of that. I think there's also agreement that we need actual, valid, and reliable outcome measures for what is happening to students in programs, and then what happens to students in their care after, and a shared sense that many new teachers don't feel very well prepared. And I will say, from where we sit here at AFT, a couple of years ago, we did a report on some of these issues that kind of talked about the challenge of moving these interconnected systems, and felt some degree of hope that there was increasing alignment on what needed to happen. So what I want to ask the panel, in light of your terrific knowledge and work in this, is what do you see right now as the most either productive policy levers or threads to pull on to sort of untangle some of what we've been talking about? If you had to name one or two places to start in all this, in improving educator preparation, where would you want to see that start?
I'll take a stab at it. I'd love to see it start with policy privileging the partnerships, and partnerships that seek to establish a capacity that is specific to the needs of a wide and diverse range of student learning situations, cases, and capacity with respect to developing novice practitioners in a way that is safe for those students, that does not put these students at risk of not being well served, because these novices will be working under supervision, and in some cases actually adding to the capacity of that organization, because they can put shoulder to the wheel. They can actually contribute to the work at hand, the work at getting done. And right now there is, it's almost as though we build these partnerships offline. They are done finding the time to work together to create the changes that have to happen in the schools and in the with the higher ed faculty and so forth. All of that is either supported by a grant, as we structured the Teacher Quality Partnership grants, or it is done out of the good of your heart, because people really feel like, and a lot more of it is being done that way because folks want to have something that they need going forward, rather than simply continue to persist in what they have right now. So I think the partnerships represent a huge capacity lever that the field is ready to take up.
Thank you. So other key levers, Ben, and
yeah,
then Francis.
So in the appendix to our policy report, which I think is included in the packets if you picked up, you can look and see the information that programs that are part of Deans for Impact are able to gather on their teacher candidate effectiveness. In order to get that data, we literally picked up the phone and reached out to the directors of data and assessment at each of the programs led by a member dean to figure out sort of how they're gathering, what they can gather, and what the obstacles are to what they can gather. And the most common response that we heard was that, yeah, there's data that's out there, but state law blocks us from getting it. Mm-hmm. That we actually can't get the information that is already in the system that we would like to have. Now, sometimes I have to say I think that that's used maybe even within some of our programs as a reason for not pushing as hard as they can, because we have seen member deans who have been real leaders who've been able to route around some of those obstacles that are put in place. But the reality is that in many states, there's actual obstacles put in place to connecting the performance of a program with that of the graduates. So again, we have sort of this war on data, this sort of knowledge nihilism that has taken place that has prevented some of the leaders in our group from just getting information that they would like to have in order to get some sort of assessment, some sort of insight into what sort of performance is taking place. So if we could wave our magic wand at Deans for Impact, it would be to get rid of those barriers on the one hand, and then to make the investment that's necessary. It's not, in our view, it is not an incredibly burdensome notion to think that we should be able to tie back the data that exists to that which is in our programs and build those systems. Some states have done it. They have done it. And it's interesting, I think somebody cited Race to the Top favorably, which I was pleased to hear, because it's true. Race to the Top funding helped catalyzing if you look in our report, you'll see one series of programs that's actually been able to get good data on outcomes around student performance. It's in North Carolina. It's because North Carolina had the funds in order to build those systems. They have a relatively robust data system. Tennessee, we don't have a member dean from Tennessee, but Tennessee has the systems in place because we made that investment. So I think if we could make that policy shift, we'd see a lot more programs taking seriously the notion of quote unquote continuous improvement.
Great, thank you. Fran?
So I can think of something that Sharon mentioned, which would be everybody being able to teach reading. And I mean even at the high school level, reading at the content, in the content areas, because it is such a critical piece. Deborah Ball asks the question, with her teaching works, if you were to think of teachers in the same ways that you think of doctors entering the profession, what are the essential skills and knowledge that they would have when they leave their program? I am very comfortable with that idea of I know it's going to shift the way you do it when you, depending on where you land, but I think we ought to be able to say there are 10 or 12 key teaching strategies that every teacher, no matter where they come from, knows how to do. I mean, there are hallmarks of a profession, and I think we might as well start talking about this as a profession.
Thank you.
I would echo everything everyone has said in response to this question. I guess couple additional ideas. I think in the context of levers for change, I think we need to use the state's authority to approve and review programs much more aggressively. I think we've seen states like Massachusetts starting to do that, because I think one of the biggest problems in this space is, and I'm basing this based on many conversations with people in the post-secondary sector, is the post-secondary institutions, and by this I don't necessarily mean the colleges of education, but the systems of post-secondary education, they don't see the K-12 system as their customer. They see the prospective student coming to the post-secondary system with their tuition check as their customer. And I think they need to see the K-12 system as their customer, and I think that would inspire the kind of partnerships that Sharon is describing if there was that push on not the dean of the College of Education, but a push on the president of the university, that they have to own and creating those relationships between their College of Education and their customers, which is the people hiring their graduates. And I guess the other thing that I would say is something CAP has proposed is having investments in the creation of more residency programs. We're pretty agnostic about whether those residency programs look like the 2 years of medical school that prospective doctors spend during their School of Medicine time in hospitals, or they look like postgraduate residencies that doctors spend after they finish medical school. But think about that. In medicine, they do both. In education, we do neither. And I think that's going to cost money, right? Because if you create those programs, the K-12 system has to make investments so that the programs do offer the kind of environments that Sharon was describing. But to us, that is such a terrific investment, because not only does it help the preparation of teachers expand beyond the school of education, their time at their school of education, but it also creates career ladders within the profession so that you have a really great teacher. He doesn't want to leave the classroom, but they want to be recognized as the experts that they are. So to me, it solves so many of the problems that we face in the education system. It's a way to get good teachers to stay, but it's also a way to give new teachers the kind of sheltered job experience they need when they first come into the profession as they build that expertise that you described. So I think if we could get we've called for federal investments in the creation of those programs, that would be a huge lever for change.
Great. Thank you all for some terrific ideas about key levers.
You know, Marla, one other point that speaks to the issue of data and the need to be very transparent and explicit about impact and outcomes. It's almost great that finally the cost of post-secondary education has provoked this question of what are we getting for it broadly. And I think that allows us to fit right in there with this question of, well, how do you measure? How do you define those outcomes? And believe me, those conversations are going on, and defining those metrics is, the community has to say, we're going to own this, and this is how we're going to report on our productivity. And I think that is an important part of being a profession. So those conversations we sponsor them, we support them, and we even support the design of tools to actually make the reporting possible.
Great.
Why are you opposed to the regulations then?
Because the regulations take us in directions that have nothing to do with that. I mean, do we want to get into the weeds about the regulations? If I felt those regulations facilitated and leveraged the work in the community to really understand about productivity and outcome measures, we would be celebrating them. We have reported to the department on the work that we are doing to support the metrics and reporting to one another and to our various communities. And they were, happy to be informed. And then we see the next round of questions, and we'll see where the regs go. Maybe the response from the community will produce something that actually is leveraged. The initial draft did not.
Let me ask a follow-up question related to that, because it relates to a question that the audience asked. And someone in the audience, I didn't hear it the exact same way, so you all tell me. So the audience member is asking, with Ben's exceptions, why are all the other panelists not supporting the use of student learning data? And I didn't think I heard you all not supporting. I think I heard a lot of how issues and concern about sanction. But tell me, does everyone here support the use of student learning data in thinking about teacher preparation and its effectiveness?
I don't think I think it's a very hard line to draw. There is no direct route to it. But I think, I can cite graduates of ours who in their first year have made have made their students enormously successful. That's not the issue. The issue, it seems to me, is yes, you look at student performance data as one indicator, but it's not the only indicator. I worked for years with the Teachers Network Leadership Institute, and one of the things that I would, as these teachers did action research in their classrooms, was they might be in an 11th grade classroom, a 9th grade classroom with kids who were reading at the 3rd or 4th grade level. And they got them to this 6th or 7th grade level. And there was no acknowledgement of that because the regulation, it was not it was not the kind of work that was being looked for. But so yes, look at student work, but look at student work in context and see what the teacher is doing. And the other piece is teachers don't function alone. Jaime Escalante couldn't do the work that he did at Garfield when he left for another school. The community was not there to support him. This is work that must be done as a group of colleagues who are there to raise the level of practice in the school.
Can I ask a question, though? I mean, so 2 points on that. I mean, one, when we're talking about using data for program evaluation, teacher preparation programs, we're not looking at individual teachers. We have a much larger N size. So to the extent you're worried about sort of the context, you've got, teachers, and, again, depending on the size of the program, that you're sending out to many different contexts. And so, I mean, at least from a sort of being able to make a sort of different evaluation, the transfer is now moving away from actually asking an individual teacher to be held responsible for the context of their learning to one of sort of looking at an overall sort of how in general are the teachers you're producing, like how effective are they? And this is my question to you, Francis. You said sort of, you have evidence that the teachers you've trained at Penn are improving student learning. I'd like to know, what is that evidence? And if it is showing that, then why don't we have that for the majority of teacher preparation programs in the United States of America? We do not have that information.
Most teacher ed programs do not follow their students.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that's the problem. I mean, that's
No,
why
I-
the federal government is proposing regulations to address that very fact.
I totally get that, but you ask why not? Because most teacher ed programs are tuition driven. So the student leaves and there it goes. If you build these partnerships and your students move in to these settings, you will start to have that kind of data. But it is so hard to follow them. I've done all sorts of, frou-frou things to try and bring people back. I now have a 5th year celebration at Penn, just so I can get people who've been out 5 years to come back and get a special prize for staying 5 years. You know what? It brings them back, and then I can get the data. But if without this follow-through in places that you have access to, it's gone.
And this tracks back to some of the earlier conversation and comment around investments and how they're used in data capacity and things that we talked about. So I will tell the folks in the room that you now have to stop thinking, because I have more questions than we're going to be able to get to in the next 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm going to start trying to combine some of them together. So here's an interesting one. What are your thoughts on addressing raising the bar and increasing the diversity of the teaching workforce at the same time, given that we know many mechanisms for thinking about raising the bar, licensure exams, et cetera, may have differential impact on prospective teachers of color? And along with that is the whole issue of attracting and retaining a diverse group of people overall in a profession that doesn't seem very publicly attractive in many ways. So everyone wants to answer that. So I'm going to start with Carmel. You had
Yes.
your hand up as
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
and
yeah.
then work our way through.
Thanks. So I guess when we talk about raising the bar, we include in that, it's not just raising the bar in terms of the academic qualifications of prospective teachers, but also raising the bar in terms of looking for non-academic qualifications and looking at things like the diversity of the people going into the profession. I think some of the ways we think we can tackle those issues together would be first investing in minority serving institutions so we can improve their programs and make them the elite programs of the country. I think another way of doing that is to provide additional financial aid to diverse candidates who are going into the profession, or loan forgiveness programs that are much more aggressive than the loan forgiveness programs that we have right now, and giving special emphasis in that context to diversity. I think the other thing that we have to keep in mind is we have to be purposeful about it. We can't just wait for it to happen. And I think we have examples of programs all across the country that are being purposeful about recruiting people into the profession to begin with, but also in that context, specifically looking to recruit people with diverse backgrounds.
So the thing that came to mind immediately is one of the programs that I run I have this urban teacher ed program, and then I have the exact same curriculum working with 11 of the most elite boarding schools in the country. And one of the fascinating pieces for me has been to watch that second program, because if you're devoted to urban ed as I am, this is a very hard pill to swallow, but at the same time, I'm learning so much. And here's something that the boarding schools did last year that blew me away. They went to their recruiter, Carney Sando, which is one of the big recruiters for independent schools, and they said to them, "We're not dealing with you anymore unless at least 50% of the students whom you bring to our program are students of color." Guess what? We have totally transformed the number of number of students of color in our program for these boarding schools. Now, that was so instructive to me, because one of the things I've been talking about for a long time is in a place like Penn, where or NYU, where the tuition is significant, I think that you can name a track or a specialty that you want to really support, and you can get graduates, alumni to support it. To support a teacher in a 10-month program, that's $45,000. You can get somebody to cough that up, and you could transform the programs and really have a conversation that involves diversity, involves different cultures, different languages, all of that. You put your money where your mouth is, in other words. But there was also, way back in the 80s, I think, and I can't remember what it was called, there was a federal program where, Joan, do you remember, Teacher Corps.
Teacher Corps, right.
Teacher Corps. Incredibly powerful work. Some of the best work in teacher ed ever done. And those people shaped teacher education in the, I'm going to say, 15 years following their immersion in Teacher Corps. And so diversified the ranks of teachers in that way.
Can I add too? I just one of the parts of my job that has been genuinely soul enriching is that we're at a kind of raw moment, I think, in the United States, at least in my experience living here. And whoever asked this question, thank you for asking it, because there's probably nothing I think about more in the context of my job. And I have the opportunity to speak and talk with leaders who know a heck of a lot more about what needs to be done and where we need to go with this. And again, I don't want to put her on the spot, but Dr. Herring and I have had a lot of conversations about this very topic. And one of the many things that she's taught me is that there's a phrase, a mantra, a sort of ethos within the HBCU community about taking students where they are and taking them where they need to be. Mm-hmm. And that is such a beautiful notion, I think, of what teacher preparation writ large should do, that I've talked to Dr. Herring about how that, like, HBCUs can become leaders within education writ large in having that focus on the people in their care, the students in their care, which some of the more well-known research institutions perhaps have not had that focus as they've looked at research dollars and peer-reviewed publications as their metrics of success. Mm-hmm. And yet the challenge is that take them from where they are to where they need to be. How do we know if they're where they need to be? That's the question for us. But there is no question that we believe, I think I can speak for the Deans for Impact community, that we can raise expectations for teacher preparation and diversify our workforce. I refuse to believe in a country that thinks that can't get done.
Well, and absolutely, I agree 100%. I just don't want us to, I think we should kind of disabuse ourselves of the notion that selectivity and diversity are somehow competing objectives. But if you're going to, be really accountable. As you have illustrated with the HBCUs, you hew first to the mission of the institution and to the ethics of the profession, and you admit those students that you know you can get across the finish line, and those that you are willing to invest in and take a chance. Those are the students that get admitted. Now that we're counting persistence and completion a lot more assiduously than ever across higher education, including teacher education, we're studying what contributes to those the rates of students stopping and dropping out. And interestingly, it is rarely their academic ability. If they get admitted to the university, they have met the requirements of the university academically. Then to be admitted to the educator preparation program, you have to have at least a 2.7, but the average of candidates coming into educator preparation is 3.2. That's on college work. That's not high school. That's on college work. They got in on the same terms as everybody else. They're surviving academically, and then you meet the realities of life. Can they persist? Or are they pulled back home because of the demands of the family? Often financial issues intervene, and very often, if you get them over that freshman year and get them acclimated and oriented to that campus community, you've got a real shot at getting them across to graduation. So it's the student service side of it, in which certainly educator preparation, but all other possible majors have to contribute more to that side of the culture of the campus and the university and the program in order to get these students out. And it doesn't matter what age they are. It doesn't matter the ethnicity. If they feel isolated, if they don't feel embraced, if they are not supported in addressing some of the challenges of life that will confront them and compete with their wish to be a student, they will not be successful. So it's rarely the academic ability of these students that cause us to lose them.
I have a question kind of related to sort of large-scale gathering of information. So can the current needs and experiences of current in-service teachers be leveraged to improve teacher preparation programs? And if so, how can we gather information on these needs and experiences systematically?
I have an idea, one that I've proposed and got very little traction, but maybe right now we could shake on it, Marla. The unions could poll them. You know, I mean, like, one of the things I think unions have incredible access to your membership. Like, you could ask them, so now at whatever stage you are in your career, what do you know now that you wish you'd known then? And what was the experience that you had that either did or did not give you the preparation that you now wish you had? And feed that data back to us. We would love to see that information come back. And some groups have done that recently. I think the Hope Street group did a poll of it. I think Teach Plus has done some of that work. And I know that you guys have done some of that work, so I don't make it sound, but like a comprehensive review, I think it would be really helpful.
And just to pick up on that, thanks, Bannon. In fact, the last time we did a real focus on preparation issues, though, was a couple of years ago. We haven't been able to do that lately. But I will note that there is an extensive survey on teacher working and workplace conditions that's available on the AFT website and adaptable for others to use. And a good piece about that is that in the new ESSA, it's an acceptable use of resources to actually use that kind of surveying. So there may be a way to build on that. So anybody else? Carmen?
I would, not to sound like a one-note Johnny, but I would argue that if we did create those residency programs that I described, those would be practicing teachers who I would argue should have a joint appointment with the School of Education, and their job would not only be to help with the induction of new teachers, but also to feed back into the schools of education real live information about real life practice and give them feedback about their curriculum and how they're doing in terms of preparing teachers, again, to go to the medical model. To be a professor in a school of medicine, you must be a practicing doctor, and you spend a lot of your time teaching your students in the hospital, not in the post-secondary institutions. So I really think that we need to change how we structure and think about the faculty at the post-secondary level.
Can I just be a little controversial though, Carmel? So I want to caution against thinking of residencies as the panacea because, and I say this as someone who is completely supportive of them. Jesse Solomon, the lead of Boston Teacher Residency, one of the oldest and I think most well-established residencies, part of Deans for Impact. But the reality is that in a lot of these schools, and this is an uncomfortable truth, the schools are undoing what teacher preparation programs have tried to prepare them for. There are cultures that have been created that may be in a certain way that is very different from what the teacher preparation programs are preparing for. And what you'd like to think is that you can start to bring them into alignment by pushing them together through these partnerships. But some of those partnerships, this has been tried. This is not like the first time. The professional development school model was wholly premised on this. And when it worked brilliantly. And when it didn't, it was a disaster. It was a merger of folks who had very different cultures, very different ideas. So I'm totally supportive of residencies. I totally think we need to move and think about that. But the idea that you can just push these different cultures together, wave a wand, call it a residency, and then the training is necessarily going to be improved.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. Even if they did work perfectly, I would agree with you that they're not the panacea. It's just like one I think fairly powerful thing we can do. And again, when I talk about residencies, I love the Boston program, but the reality was the Boston program was created by the school district. Payzant created it. He got the University of Massachusetts at Boston to sign on the dotted line to get it accredited, but he drove it, he designed it, it was his program. So I guess what I would like to see moving forward is that the schools of education themselves own them and see as part of the purpose this meshing of cultures, and I would argue shifting of cultures, because I think if we don't shift those cultures, the post-secondary programs are not going to produce what we need in terms of the K-12 system.
So I think you'd be really happy to see what's happening through what we're calling our Commission on Clinical Practice. It is a commission driven by the National Association of Professional Development Schools, which is the network of the thriving professional development schools, and this network for educational excellence and AACTE. And these folks are bringing together now, they're codifying what this means. They're making the definitions clear. They're saying that how those clinical folks should be related to the school district and to the university. They're setting down the template for the profession. If you're going to do it, this is what it looks like, so that in fact we can compare apples to apples and really hold ourselves accountable for some standards for a state of the art, which is now the result of several years of experimentation. And so I think the clinical development component is really starting to gain some traction as a mature model that is worthy now of really following with some good metrics that match those definitions, and maybe some observation, maybe a number of kinds of research methods that could go in to help us examine them further.
I'm going to ask one more question that gets kind of specific about teacher preparation, and this is fair warning to our panel that after that, I'm going to ask you for kind of a 30-second wrap-up of any one piece of advice you want to give on this topic, whether it be to policymakers or teacher educators or advocates, community, parent, teacher advocates. So think about that for a minute. Now I'm going to connect the dots back to a conference that the Schenker Institute held on Friday last, I believe, that was on the social side of education. It was a really terrific conference for anyone who was able to be part of that. And so one of the things presented there was the results of several recent studies that suggest that teacher collaboration is associated with student achievement. and suggesting that collaborative schools, and I think to some degree Francis was talking around this issue, are superior sites for teacher learning. And one of the presenters in particular, Matt Ronfelt, found that teachers who learned to teach in field placement schools with better collaboration quality were more effective teachers after graduation. So the question is, what are the implications of these findings for teacher preparation programs?
I mean, that's a great question. Thank you whoever took the time to type that up and print it on a note. I don't know how that happened, but yeah. I mean, that research, I don't know that anyone's done it yet on teacher preparation programs, but really most of the lessons that you learn from a K-12 school, an elementary school, a middle school, a high school, they apply to education at the higher education level as well. So what we see in the programs that are participating in Deans for Impact, the ones we've had a chance to visit, is that where there is collaboration and sharing of data and sharing of insight across a program, then you have strength that is built upon that. You have the ability for different teacher educators to walk down the hall and say, look, this person, are they on track? Are they going to be ready to start teaching? Are they even ready to do their student teaching that's starting next semester? If not, how can we work together to address that issue? The reality is, though, is that if you think that, schools make regular K-12 schools make higher education just look, the whole stereotype about the siloing, it exists for a reason. I mean, it is really, really problematic. It is problematic within institutions as much as it is across institutions. So people first are they think that they're inside their institution, they do it that way, but even within that, because of the ways in which we've created quote-unquote academic freedom, many of them have the freedom to just do what they want, and the levers and the incentives and the ability to change behavior are not there. So it's one of the things that's interesting is that the deans of Deans for Impact have to use soft power to try to get behavior change, because there's actually very little leverage even within the leadership of that program. K-12 looks positively high functioning in terms of its structures and its system, which is remarkable to say. So that research, I hope, and I've been thinking a lot about, and it's not yet part of the Deans for Impact policy agenda, but at some point down the road, we need to figure out a way in which we actually start to incentivize higher education, to stop thinking, in this sort of individual siloed way, and to have everybody bought into the enterprise that these future practitioners, we collectively own and are responsible for their effectiveness. So what are we going to do together to make them as effective as we can?
Anyone else on that
I
question?
couldn't agree with you more. I really, and I have seen that when a really coherent program happens, it spills over to the students, and they start to look for that too. So but it takes serious work, and academics don't love meetings, but you've got to do it. You've got to meet all the time, and practice actually what doctors do. Is it called a postmortem, where you step back and look at what happened? I think that this is really serious work, and it's part of the education of teacher educators, is to see ourselves as practitioners and professionals really shaping and raising the level of our practice by talking with one another, because students can't put it together all by themselves any better than a kid in a classroom can figure out how to make things relate if a teacher doesn't provide the scaffold for it.
You've heard from a real authentic voice in the field. I say to my members all the time that our candidates, every single one of them, should experience pedagogy and instruction the way they will be expected to teach when they get out there. So if they're going to use formative assessment, they have to experience formative assessment as a learner. If they're going to do project-based learning, they have to experience project-based learning as a learner. I thought it was fascinating. I've reflected on this a lot. The most recent OECD analysis on efficacy suggested that teachers worldwide define efficacy. There are three components: what they know, what they can do with what they know, and their networks. They feel like a fully functioning professional when they are called on to put their knowledge to work in practice, not when they're called on to implement some, mandated, scripted instructional regime, and they feel that they use the networks for further learning. And I wonder, in educator preparation, our candidates should witness that among those who work with them. And this is not just across departments in the School of Education. This is across the institution, including the college, the arts and sciences. So just getting the idea of developing literacy in a discipline. You might be a math teacher, but you need to know how to write as a math teacher, as well as do the computations. So raising these dimensions of knowing and dimensions of teaching, I think, in fact, raise the bar on the standards that we have for educator preparation.
Thank you. So while our panelists are collecting their thoughts for their final 30 seconds of either advice or retort to another panelist, let me just tell you about two things that are the next two events that are coming up with the Schenker Institute. The next conversation in the series is New Visions of Collective Bargaining in American Education. That's on Wednesday, May 11th, same time, same place. And on Wednesday, May 18th, there'll be a special panel on the international refugee crisis, and that will be from 4 to 6 in the evening. So, and you can find out more information on any of those on the Schenker Institute website. So I'm going to start at the far end with Francis, work my way back to Ben, and just ask for a quick wrap-up from each of our terrific panelists.
I always wanted to be a teacher, and I ran at the very end of when I first started teacher education, ran into a quote, which is, "Teachers affect eternity. No one knows where their influence stops." Henry Adams. And I truly believe that. So I'm completely invested in making the best teachers we can.
I guess I would just like to end where I started, which is, I think, as we tackle this issue in the context of education, we really need to keep our eye on the profession as a whole. I think Francis has made a really good case for that. So that means we can't think about teacher preparation in isolation. We have to think about how we recruit them into the teacher prep programs, how we prepare them, how we bring them into the profession, and then once they're there, how we continue to support and develop teachers so that they can be lifelong learners. And I think we also have to think about how we organize schools. I mean, the last question about collaborative teaching is a perfect example of something that you can't really inspire collaborative instruction if we continue to expect teachers to spend 90% of their day standing up in front of kids teaching them. They need, like post-secondary educators have, they need time to collaborate with each other, to reflect on their work, reflect on how their students are doing. So that's just one example of how we can't think about improving the profession without thinking about how we structure schools as well as how we structure the systems of teacher preparation.
Thank you. Sharon.
It's hard to think about teacher education without thinking about student learning. In fact, I don't even try. So with student learning at the very heart of the matter, the question becomes providing each student with instructional support at a level, at an expert level, so that those students can develop and contribute to our broader economy and our democracy. So I see teacher education at the heart of our democracy, and therefore it is so worth the effort to figure it out, and so worth the investment to help these programs achieve some of their most ambitious improvement goals.
Thanks, Sharon. Ben.
Well, I have 3 retorts. No, I'm just kidding. No, and I don't even have any advice. Deans for Impact, we describe ourselves as a stewardship organization. We really are trying to steward the work of the leaders who've chosen to participate and help them. And I guess what I would want to close with here is that all of you have taken now 2 hours out of your day to come sit and listen to 4 people speak on a panel. And we haven't modeled necessarily the best pedagogy here in terms of having you to just be quiet and not be able to interact. And I apologize for that. But the fact that you made that commitment today and that you have this interest, all I would say is that if anything that we have said or that I have said has interested you, like reach out, like get in touch, email, call, we are trying and we are part of one effort. Everybody here is doing their part to try to make this issue. I agree completely with what Sharon Robinson just said about the connection between teacher education, the future teachers that we're preparing, and fundamental health of the American democracy, which for the first time in my life I've started to question. And so if you have cared that much to be here today, I hope that this isn't the last time that we have a chance to interact, and that if you want, I have business cards, there's a website, whatever the method is that you prefer, I hope we can stay in touch.
Great. Thank you, Ben. I want to thank all of you in the room for spending those 2 hours with us and sticking with us. Really appreciate that, and I hope you will all join me in thanking our panel for a really rich and engaging conversation. Thank you all so much. We're done.